well, let's kick it off. So I'm Peggy Kuiper. I'm the Director of Sport and Recreation Business at UAF, and we're here tonight with Brian Nacho Traynor and Cricket Carlson. Cricket is a grad of ours within the School of Management, so shout out there. I just want to say a quick thanks to Travis and Spencer for setting this up, and obviously for Brian and Cricket for taking the time to be with us tonight. We really appreciate it. So Travis, the floor is yours.
Yes, welcome everybody to the third iteration of the Sport and Recreation Business Spring Esport Speaker Series. I am very excited to be joined by two people that I have worked closely with and know pretty well as we talk about some pretty sticky issues in the world of esports and gaming, specifically stigmas, stereotypes, and myths. I think today, the unique thing about the two guests that we have is they both offer the perspective as gaming and esports professionals on the business side, as well as gaming and streaming professionals on the gaming and streaming side. So without further ado, I would like to first say thank you to the School of Management, thank you to UAF Esports, Mike Jewell, your team, and then thank you to CDC Content Creation for helping us put all this on, and for everybody else in the School of Management who has helped out in getting this all put together. The two goals that I have outlined for today is really to give everybody the point of view from inside the gamer's world. Admittedly, I'm not a gamer, so I'm going to rely on our two panelists here to give us a little bit of insight, and then debunk some of the common myths and stereotypes that are perceived with gaming. I think, especially as somebody who's not a gamer, who now is working in esports, in some fashion, there was a lot of things that I was not aware of that I believe that most people on this probably are not aware of as well. So like every other one that we've had, I would encourage you to turn your video on and participate. I have a series of questions here, but no one wants to hear me talk more than I have to. So when we get towards the end, we'll make sure we have some time set up as probably about quarter to the end. But before that, I would love it if our two guests would introduce themselves. I'm going to throw it first to my friend and colleague, Cricket Carlson.
Hi, everyone. I see a couple familiar faces, a couple former students. Hi, everybody. I see also a sister in here. Hi, Shelby. My name is Cricket Carlson. It's true. I am a former student and a graduate of the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Right now, I work as a communications manager for a game studio. It's called Menominee Park. I'm working on 2 unannounced titles right now. If you've ever heard of Slime Rancher, that's my game. I've worked for some of the biggest studios in the area of community and web production, specifically geared towards gaming, Rooster Teeth being one of them. And then on the side, when time allows, I do some streaming and content creation on my own. My background in esports is more on the production side. I've worked with South by Southwest Gaming. I've worked with DreamHack. I've worked with PAX, Twitch Rivals to put on mostly fighting game tournaments, MOBA tournaments, Clash of Clans, mobile gaming tournaments. And today I am fortunate enough to be speaking to you about themes in and around diversity in gaming.
Awesome. And Nacho, you want to give it a go? Give us a little bit about you, your background, and kind of what brings you here.
Yeah, so it's gonna be hard to follow that up, but I'm Nacho. So I work for the Hornets. Me and Travis get to be involved in the Venom, which is like the esports brand of the Charlotte Hornets in the NBA organization. So kind of some background on me is I went to college at Miami University of Ohio, not University of Miami in Florida. We get a little bit upset when people mix up those two colleges. But I actually have a background in studio art. So I was a painter, I was a traditional artist, that's kind of what I went to school for. And then obviously I joined the 2K League, which is like the NBA 2K brand of their esports. So I was a member of the Orlando Magic Gaming, and I was a member of the Minnesota T-Wolves team, which is T-Wolves Gaming. And I was a player on both those teams. And then I decided, hey, I'm too good at branding myself as a player. Let's move on to the organization. So I kind of run the day-to-day operations with the Hornets Venom, and kind of see like a little bit of the marketing and obviously the a little bit of the assisting of the coaching. I got handed off to my fellow man, Big West, but that's kind of my background. Just kind of like an art / gaming / player / a lot of different things as far as wearing hats.
And I'm going to throw it out there just to tee him up a little bit here. Nacho, do you want to flex a little bit with that?
Oh, yeah. Oh, man, yeah, Travis. I appreciate you, man. So I got to flash the ring a little bit.
Woo!
Yeah, so we won the championship season 2, so they gave us like an NBA style championship ring. So I was like, hey, listen, I just need another one. But I was like, I keep this always next to me to.
So for people who I guess I forgot to introduce myself, Travis Meiser, I'm an adjunct professor for UAF School of Management and Sport and Recreation Business Program. I am the manager of partnership development for the Charlotte Hornets. Part of our brand, as Nacho alluded to, is Hornets Venom GT, which is our esports team that launched in summer of 2020. Believe it or not a great time to launch an esports team, although it was a silver lining in everything that happened with some of the growth around the NBA 2K League as a whole, which is a direct subsidiary of the NBA. And Nacho and I get to work together pretty closely. So Nacho does have a ring from before he got to the Hornets, before we expanded into Venom. And hopefully we get another one here at the end of this season that kicks off here in a couple of weeks. So that all being said, I know we've touched on a little bit cricket. I know you have some background in streaming as well as the operations in the community and digital and marketing. And Nacho, both as a player and now also in the community and marketing side of Hornets Venom GT. But we're here to talk about stigmas and stereotypes and myths in gaming. And so cricket, I know that after teaching esports in the fall with you, that this is something that's very near and dear to you in my understanding and in our conversations. Can you talk a little bit about, just a very easy kick off the question, when you talk about misconceptions in gaming, I think there's a lot of them. I think in our generation growing up, it wasn't always encouraged to be video game. We're kind of the first ones to come through with video games. Some parents allowed it, some parents didn't. But can you talk a little bit about the common misconceptions, or maybe the biggest misconception of gamers and streamers in today's world?
Sure. I think the biggest thing that right off the bat, what do we all think of when we think of video games? It's a medium for children. It's for kids. It's games. It's toys. And what we're finding is, as some generations that started with earlier forms of gaming, I'm going to say it like Atari, your Dreamcast, they're starting to age with that hobby. So it is no longer a medium that's dominated by children 6 to 12 years old. In fact, I want to say within the last month or two, we finally got the big GDC report, and it looks like it's actually shifted, that the average age of a gamer is actually 20s to 30s. So it is actually becoming a hobby that more adults actually actively pursue. So that's probably the first one and the biggest one, that when you come to the table to talk to probably your friends or your parents, or even for me, sometimes in a business setting, to convince people that this is a really, really huge pastime. And a lot of people are actively engaged in participating, not just on a console, on their mobile phone, on their PC. There's so many ways to game these days. And I think maybe one that goes into a little bit more the themes of today is probably what a female gamer is. Something that's very, very frustrating for female gamers is the perception that we all play Candy Crush, that we're all playing Sudoku on our phone, where there are so many different people who game today. It is really something that everyone in the population is taking actively pursuing these days. Even I think countries that tend to not have as much discretionary income, for instance, we're seeing mobile gaming really, really take off in some countries that are less affluent than the US. Those are probably the two that, when I think of gaming and probably unhealthy misconceptions that come to mind for me.
So Nacho, I'm gonna throw the same thing to you, as someone who's played professionally and now on our side of the world. What is the biggest misconception that you see, and maybe give me one or two that people from the outside think when they look at gamers?
Well, I mean, the obvious one is like we're all basement dwellers, antisocial. People who don't, go outside and don't have an athletic bone in their body. But I think that's the biggest misconception is obviously, especially in esports, is like, everyone sees like the nerdy kids, like the quote unquote nerdy kids are the ones who are the gamers. but it's like I think a lot of it is kind of changed with kind of the perception. Obviously, I feel like I'm old at 28, and it's like my generation and people a little bit older than me, we kind of normalize gaming. So we don't see it as like a stigma. Like obviously, my parents would. This kind of ties into my me joining the league is hey, I got told I'm going to Orlando in a week, and I told my parents that, like, are you sure you're not getting scammed? Like, is this real? Like, all this stuff is like, no, this is real. This is a thing that happens. Like they have no clue. And it's like, they don't, they see it as like, oh, you're just wasting your life, go outside and do something with yourself. I can't imagine how many people have heard that. But that's a big misconception. I think a lot of that has changed though, with kind of the forefront of esports and kind of the business of just video games in general. I mean, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry now. Like it's the biggest entertainment industry out there. So it's kind of fallen to the wayside of that old school stigma, and that's good. And then the other misconception I think we have is just obviously women in gaming. It's just that's the nature of it. Is especially in major esports, you don't see a lot of representation. In our league, we've got, I think we just had our draft like a week or two ago. We have 2 or 3 who joined us, and it's like 3 people of 120, which obviously is very skewed towards the male demographic, and that's how it is in almost every other major esport. So and it's like that's a problem that still needs to be overcome, and I think a lot of it just comes back to just the better understanding and better I guess marketing too. Is like, hey, this isn't just a male dominated industry. It's like there's a good representation of women and obviously other people, and it's like we're still not there yet, at least in the esports scene.
And that kind of tees it up, Nacho. I was going to get to that in a little bit, but I'm going to throw it back to you. I know you told me the other day some of the things that the 2K League as well as Hornets Venom GT are doing to encourage women in gaming. Can you share a little bit of that with us? And if there's stuff that's still proprietary, you don't have to share that. But as far as the 2K League and specifically to the league and specifically to Hornets Venom GT, what are some things that are being done towards women in gaming, and what are some things that we would like to get done in the near future to encourage women in playing 2K?
Yeah, so with 2K specifically, like we, for example, host like events strictly for women. So, for example, like hey, they want to learn how to learn at a pro level skill level from our players. We put them through boot camps once or twice a month. Or we do a special training seminar. So like this past off season is like I was involved with some of the women who got drafted this a few weeks ago, and getting them kind of like film review and like player management skills, psychiatric stuff, like getting in the frame of being an athlete. And I think that's come a long way, specifically with us and the 2K League. And I think it's that's the one thing I would say the 2K League I'm very proud of being forward thinking about is being extremely inclusive to other people that aren't the stereotypical 18 to 25-year-old male. We've done a good job as a league to kind of cast as wide net as possible, and I think we've kind of been almost at the forefront of that too. And we've only been in the league for 2 years compared to as being there's been a 4-season league so far.
Yeah, I've been very impressed with the league taking that head on really from day one, and they've made strides. I mean, I think there was a woman that was drafted in season 2, none in season 3, and now 3 in season 4. So there has been some growth of that. We're not there yet, but it's something that's going in the right direction. Cricket, you brought it up, and I'm very curious as to your perspective. How do you get more women comfortable with playing video games that aren't necessarily, they're very dominated by men, and how do we encourage women to start playing in areas that they might not be as prevalent in right now?
Well, a couple different things. One of them surely is representation. And I'm sure if you're a student right now, or if you have any interest in the area of diversity, representation is important. Choose characters in there that are strong female characters that aren't just these Mary Sues. Pick your color palette wisely. Make sure that when you're designing games, that you are giving something in there that women, maybe not necessarily stereotypical, but something that is appealing to a wider demographic and a wider audience. I think that's a really, really good place to start. Some games are starting to include things like some sort of a narrative into their story. What we find is women actually tend to like narrative and multiplayer. They like to play with other people. So enhancing the way that users interact is very, very important. On the flip side of that, something very, very important is managing harassment in those multiplayer settings. And this is a really, really big problem that we see where a lot of studios are really, really trying hard to do better if they are trying to do better. And that's simple things like including chat filters. If you see hate speech in a chat, make sure it's auto detected. That person is pulled, or whatever they said that's inappropriate, it's asterisked out and automatically caught and put in some sort of a disciplinary or report system for female users. One of the biggest issues that I have had, and this is just coming at it anecdotally, is if I go into a competitive shooter atmosphere, an Overwatch, a Valorant, a CSGO, a Rainbow Six Siege, it is very, 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 very difficult for me to participate on open comms. Almost instantly, people don't realize that I'm a grown woman. I am told to get back in the kitchen. I'm called horrible, horrible, disgusting things that I couldn't even repeat in here. I have sometimes an entire team that will jump on me and report me just for being a female in the game. Doesn't matter that I'm doing better than them and that I'm a better player than them. It's just by nature, we have this weird cultural problem right now where some people want to troll and they specifically look for people to target. There's a really, really interesting theory that I can't remember right now, and it has to do with like a social hierarchy theory where certain men who consider themselves more beta in like a social hierarchy will actually, if they perceive a female as being something better at something than they are, they find it a threat to where they kind of lie on this hierarchy, and they will target that woman just to kind of feel better about themselves. So that's another really, really good way that games can combat the issue that women have participating in these games. Make sure that we can report, we can ban. There's disciplinary measures in place for those things, and leagues by extension I think can do that too. When there is bad player conduct, when there's harassment going on, there need to be consequences for that kind of behavior. So those are, I think, a couple different ways that you can appeal more to women.
Yeah, when you talk, and this is me not knowing the inner workings of all of the gaming world, when you're talking about on comms, that it means over the headset you're actually talking to someone, the people you're playing with or against. It's a little bit more challenging there to stop hate speech, right? Because in chat it's easier to filter because it's text. Right. How have teams, is it a reporting function that you can report when something happens and it's recorded, or how can you actively stop that in that setting? Or how can, if it's the game developers, if it's the streamer, like how does that get reported currently?
That's a very good question. And this is an area that is evolving very, very quickly, especially for some of these juggernaut franchises, some of these big AAA games that have massive player bases, that have anywhere from 600,000 concurrent players at any given point in time. A Fortnite is a good example of that. A Valorant is a good example of that. Chat filters is one way on the programming engineering side that we can automate catching some of those things. There are so many people in here doing this that we have to automate, and we can't catch all of them. Making sure that in-game lobbies and in the game, there are report mechanisms. That's huge. Being able to stop the gameplay right then and there, find a problematic user, and to report them, to flag that user as a problematic user. That's very, very important. Being able to mute people. There are some games, and studios are, again, trying to get better at this. They will automatically opt you into open voice comms. So for those of you who are kind of struggling with what I'm talking about here, some games have open mic. That means I am automatically in, whether there's no manual mute button or whatever, I'm automatically in. And then there's an option to toggle when you want to speak, which makes sure that any environmental sounds or whatever aren't picked up. I actually get to choose when I'm speaking. And then there's an opt-in, opt-out altogether. Now, for very competitive games and shooters, communication is really, really key, which is why for competitive gamers, they're going to want to participate in that ecosystem. So making sure that you have that opt-in, opt-out, those reporting mechanisms. And then I think the other really, really important piece to all of this is, well, two things. Making sure that there are actual consequences for those users. Sometimes that is X number of consequences, excuse me, flags against your account. You might have a temporary ban, or you're banned from being able to use voice comms. If there are enough, then automatically you lose your license, you're out, you're no longer able to play. Some users work around this. They can buy multiple accounts. CSGO is a classic example. It's always on sale. The problematic users are getting back into that ecosystem. The other thing is taking those measures to foster a positive community culture and to make sure that you are really getting rid of those people. Rainbow Six Siege did a good job of recently. If someone is flagged for using hate speech, they are kicked from a lobby in a game immediately. And system wide, there's an announcement that basically kind of shames the user and says this person was kicked out of the game for using X type of hate speech. I don't want to, I'm sorry, I know I'm talking a lot here, but Travis, if you want to go into later what everyone in here can do to participate in this ecosystem and how to intervene if you see problematic behavior, I would love to talk about that.
Yeah. I absolutely, I have that as we start to round it out. So I appreciate that, teeing it up. Nacho, I'm curious from your perspective, the 2K League as a whole, and then just as a gamer, I know the 2K League has had some issue with some types, you know, the I don't want to say hate speech, but some of the negativity in the culture with some of the players. Some players have been kicked out of the league. I know you've been in front of a few different issues from that side as well. And then when you look at 2K, the community as a whole, what do you think are some of the issues in the community, and how do you think that it can be solved from a league perspective or just in the community as a whole, which we know that the 2K community is incredibly tight knit. So what are some of the issues that you see, and what are some of the ways that they can stop it?
Yeah, so some of the issues I think I see with the league is kind of unique to 2K. Of you know, it's a huge African American demographic. So it's obviously one of the most prevalent African American played games, and I think the 2K League has the biggest split of African American representation in the esports scene. So some of the issues we have is obviously racially motivated, of players getting kicked out for racially motivated comments or videos, or even liking something on Twitter. You know, it's like anything racially charged obviously is bad, but with a league like ours, obviously with such a huge demographic of it, it's just amplified even higher. I think what we've seen, there's like a player, for example, like I'm not gonna give names obviously, but you know, a player who should have been top 2 or 3 pick in this draft a week ago. And he wasn't allowed to join the pool because of something he said 2 years ago. That's just the reality. And I think what the 2K League has done is gotten ahead and been very strict about some of the racially charged messages and comments some players have said, even if you know, they were completely private, you know, somebody leaking a text or something. I think it's something, you know, obviously we as a society, we as an esport, we as everything, you know, it's something we can't tolerate. So that would be kind of the big thing for us as the 2K League is just the racially charged comments. But besides that, the only thing else as far as the 2K League that's concerned, that where we've had issues with is obviously, I know, Travis, I'm sure you're going to talk about later, is just the gambling. Is 2K is like, you know, it's kind of like I almost think of it as like that's the forefront to popular culture, because it's a more general. It's like how I think of Call of Duty. It's like you get kind of like the more of a broad scope you have, the more popular the game is, the I guess the more like more. I'm trying to think of the right word. Like it's got a better heartbeat on just general society. So our players, obviously with esports, they don't have a regulatory system. There's nothing, no general overban like the NBA has the Players Association. We have rules and guidelines generating like gambling. So that's another big thing, is like cracking down on players gambling, even on something that's not necessarily directly involving them, but gambling on something that's indirectly, betting on another team to lose, or betting on this amateur team to lose. Like there's a lot of things that go with that.
I think the 2K League is a bit unique in that sense. And Cricket, I think you made this point prior to us going live in the panel, is that the thing about traditional sports that have adopted esports that I don't think we're at the level yet. The 2K League specifically is not the level of CSGO or League of Legends or some of these major esports franchises or leagues. However, we started with the 2K League, Madden, FIFA started with an infrastructure. I think it's less of a startup because you have a lot of the same rules, regulations in place as the NBA or as FIFA or as the NFL. But Cricket, one of the things that you and I covered in our esports class in the fall wasn't so much about gambling, it was more about cheating. And I know that cheating is something that is still very tough, again, to put a finger on, more in the competitive space than in just logging on and playing a game. How prevalent is cheating in the world of esports, and what are the things that leagues and teams are doing to prevent that? Cricket, from your perspective?
Yeah, first, there are two different types of cheating that we need to identify here. There is cheating by use of doping. So it's using something to enhance your performance biologically, physiologically. And then there is cheating in the format of using third-party software or hardware, or somehow exploiting or gaming the system. So there are, I think, two very, very distinct types that could be broken down further from there. One of the most prevalent types of cheating is a big problem that we are seeing everywhere right now. And this is the same as the sports world, the doping area right now. And the biggest one is one of the most commonly abused drugs right now. And it's using substances like Adderall right now, sometimes with a prescription for it and sometimes without. It's really, really difficult to regulate things like that. It is so difficult for tournament organizers and for leagues. So right now, it seems like a lot of it is being left up for the teams on the collegiate level, where I think coaches and the support staff have a little bit more of a involvement in the lives of their players. Some of them know things about, who has what type of diagnosis, or maybe a prescription for something, and that's something that they look at. For players who are outside of that, who are showing up to invitationals or other tournaments, there's virtually no way to catch these things. And it's really, if you get caught, it's much like the regular sports world right now, where to some sports, they do go through the process of doing urinalysis or other types of testing for athletes to qualify. Esports isn't there yet. We're just not there yet. And some of the leagues are getting there, but we're just not there yet. So that's a very, very difficult thing for organizers to work around. On the other side of cheating, we have that using third-party clients, hardware, software. Something very unique about esports players is they're usually very, very technically savvy. They know how to use computers. They know how to use this technology. And there have been some incredible cases where people have brought in USB thumb drives and loaded in a third-party software for anything from like auto aim for headshots, or usually not wall hacks, because you can see that, but anything that is being run at, for instance, if you go to the facilities for Riot headquarters in Santa Monica, if you go to Overwatch League. When you go look at their computers and everything, they keep everything under very, very tight security. They have reps who are constantly watching. You're not allowed to bring in your own hardware for a lot of those tournaments. And that's really their best way to kind of catch those things. I think probably the biggest area is kind of the up and comers right now who are competing online, or they're maybe not in that tournament setting where people can inspect the hardware or the tools that are being used in advance of games. That's where a lot of the really embarrassing gotchas and catches are taking place right now in esports.
Yeah, and it's so tough. I think it's no different than cheating in traditional sports. Like, unless you have the funding, I mean, it all comes back to funding for your analysis testing or anything of that nature, then it's not going to happen. It's expensive, and that's just the reality of it. From the other side, there's really no challenge that's been faced in professional sports quite like adding some sort of extra software or hardware. I guess maybe like corking a bat in baseball, or in boxing, putting something in your gloves. But Nacho, have you seen cheating in the 2K world, whether that's from some sort of doping or whether that's from some sort of external hardware or software?
As far as 2K, yes, there's been instances of each. I think that we've seen instances of players using modded controllers. Obviously, we don't use mouse and keyboard, so we've seen cases of that. Not necessarily in the pro scene, but obviously with us as coaches and scouts and talent evaluators, it's you see it and it's happening, and it's hard for us to make a judgment call on are you using it or not. So a trained eye can kind of tell, but obviously it's a little bit harder. It makes our life harder. But in the actual league, no, we haven't seen it. But what we have seen in the league is, we've had an instance or two, obviously, of Adderall being used during live events. So that is a concern as far as cheating, but honestly, it really hasn't been as prevalent as I expected it would be in the 2K League. Thankfully, I'm glad that's the case. But just because it hasn't happened much doesn't mean it won't happen down the line. Because at the end of the day, is these are players specifically are playing for $1.2 million. It's like, hey, would I risk it to help me get $1.2 million? It's like, some people be like, hey, if it gives me $1.2 million, I might do it. It's like, they're like, yeah, maybe it's worth it. And then that's the reality is like, obviously, I speak of Fortnite is like, I'm not going to ask you, this is a rhetorical question, but it's like, if you're playing in a Fortnite, World Cup, summer series, and they're like, hey, this gives me a 5 or 10% chance to win the $22 million prize. It's like, you start thinking about it. Some people might think about it. So it's like, as esports grow, and it's like your monetary lives, and gaming is like, that could be the difference. The difference between you making the Fortnite World Cup or not, be different making 4 or 5 figures to 6 or 7 or 8. So it's all of a sudden it's turned into a livelihood. It's not just, hey, I want to be the number one dude on the leaderboard, and people using modded controllers back in Halo 2 or something. It's like, now it's like, hey, there's serious money on the line. Now I'm like, okay, it's almost incentivizing people to do a little bit more.
Yeah, it's incredible. And I think to your point about gambling as well, that only adds that extra layer too, whether it's cheating or throwing a game. Like, that hasn't been faced in the 2K League yet, but I'm sure that's something that has been faced elsewhere in the world of e-gaming, whether it's in America or not. I do want to get back to the idea of diversity and inclusion in gaming. And we talked about women and how to encourage women to get into gaming. But I also want to talk about marginalized communities. Nacho, you'd said the 2K League, and it's something I take a lot of pride in working with a team in the league, is incredibly diverse. There's no majority race that participates in the league, and I would argue it's probably one of the most diverse leagues from a fan base and from a competitive standpoint, from a player standpoint. But when you talk about gamer culture, and sometimes it's tough to get into the inner circles of different games and into different communities. And sometimes, unless you're welcomed in, it's even harder. And that's kind of what we talked about with women. But Cricket, I'm curious as to your perspective. What are some of the challenges outside of what we've already touched on that are faced by underrepresented communities? And that doesn't necessarily have to mean race. It could mean where you're from, your religion, what language you speak, what gender you are, LGBTQ, all of the above. What are other challenges that maybe we haven't talked about that are being faced by underrepresented populations?
Sure. I think first and foremost, just being invited to the table to game and to prove yourself in an area that is dominated, especially competitive games. It is often, and I don't want to use divisive language here, but it is dominated by white males. And that can feel very intimidating when you go into a setting and you turn and you look at everybody and not a single person looks like you. That can be very, very difficult to break into when people aren't actively inviting you and encouraging you to be part of that setting. I think another thing is there are a lot of marginalized communities that are stereotypically have not been treated well by male dominated groups, especially your CSGOs or your competitive shooter environments. And a lot of people fall in the LGBTQ spectrum there. Or I think of a lot of my friends or colleagues who are transgender. And that can be very, very scary for them to enter into some of those settings. So just being invited to the table, feeling comfortable that you belong there is something that's important. Another dynamic is in sports, there's a lot of shit talking. It's a big head game. Life is a head game, right? And esports is no different. So when there are pre, post game, mid game interactions between players and they're negative or they're targeting, and it's designed to get under your opponent's skin. When players are targeted and some of their vulnerabilities, like their protected characteristics, their race, their gender, their gender orientation, when those things are targeted, and in your real life you step outside of that game setting and you are targeted or harassed or reminded constantly that you don't fit in by society or news media, that's so hurtful and harmful and traumatic. And that is another thing that discourages a diverse population coming to participate in these games. And I want to be careful here because I don't want to scare people away from this conversation. If you've got something here that is making you uncomfortable, it's an uncomfortable thing to talk about. Please, I think the worst thing that people can do when we talk about these themes is go, well, transgender things, I don't get it, but whatever. Well, I don't have kids, but I can empathize with a single mother. I'm not a military veteran. My father was though, so I can empathize what that's like. Being LGBTQ or of a different race, it's the same thing. It doesn't matter that you don't get it or you get it. No one cares. Just treat people kindly and don't disregard their right to be there participating. The third thing that I want to hit on is, again, the communities that come around these players. And this is something that I see a lot in the on the production side when people are watching the spectation aspect of these games. Really, really big example is on Twitch Rivals when certain emotes that are nods and winks towards someone's race and attacking them. Maybe it's like a Pepe frog that's changing gender. These they're called dog whistle. They're symbols of hate speech that are used by community members to attack or demean a player. And sometimes they're not as insidious as these symbols. Sometimes when I go into chats or live streams that are not well moderated, there's just rampant racism, hate speech, inappropriate dialogue taking place. And that is where tournament organizers, admin staff, you need to make sure that you are policing up your community as much as you are making sure that the players are treating each other well. Make sure you have those mechanisms in your chat that will filter out inappropriate language, ban people, have someone live there watching and paying attention. And then I think the last thing is check in with those players. Make sure that if there is an incident, don't assume that they're a victim. Don't ever assume someone's a victim. But if you know that they're being targeted, check in with them and ask, how can we make you feel more comfortable? That goes such a long way.
It's a lot, and it's not dissimilar to some of the societal issues, I think, that were uncovered, in last summer with BLM and the other stuff that happened. I don't think it's dissimilar to that. Just in an e-gaming world, there's a lot of keyboard warriors. There's really there's no repercussions to your actions in a lot of ways. And I think, to your point, creating repercussions for those actions and creating ways to report those actions is a way that we can all start to kind of push in the right direction. Nacho, in your perspective, and then Cricket, I'll give it back to you to see if you have anything else you wanted to add. When you talk about what can we do to encourage inclusivity in the world of gaming, whether that's gender, race, ethnicity, religion, any of the above, what is it that people on this call who might be interested in gaming or interested in esports, what can they do? What's one thing that they can do to help push us in the right direction towards inclusivity for everybody?
That's a good question. I guess what it comes down to is just, spreading a little bit of awareness as far as, hey, whether you're a gamer or not, it's like, I'm sure we all know somebody who is, it's like, it's pretty obvious there. I think, like, obviously pushing whoever it may be to do what they want to do. So it's like, I think I saw like an article a few months ago where it's like, I think being a professional streamer or being in esports has become like the biggest dream for kids under the age of 13. So it's like, that's, that they want to be that, they're not wanting to be firefighters, they're not wanting to be, RC car professional drivers. They're wanting to be, esports players and professional streamers. Like, they want to be the next XQC, they want to be the next Ninja, they want to be the next Bjergsen, they want to be the next, Double Lift. Like, they're really, really pushing for that. And I think how that starts is with, people our age, who, embrace and like let it become a welcoming environment. It's like almost like, you know, like, planting the grass, planting the seed, so like everything rises. Like when water rises, everyone rises. So it's like, if we push for a positive atmosphere in esports and in gaming, and keep that push and keep bringing it even further than what it is, making sure everyone's truly on equal terms, everyone gets the same chance, I think, that encourages and uplifts people. Somebody in our family, one of your friends or one of your friends' friends, be like, okay, I can push, and I can be a part of, to the 2K League. I can be part of Halo. I can be part of, I can be the art director of, Uncharted. Whatever it could be. I think when we all normalize treating people as equals and let them understand, like, this is not just a white male dominated space. It's like, you get more eyes on it. It's kind of like the push from STEM programs right now, traditional STEM programs of, inclusivity and making, offering these chances to people outside of just males in general. So I think that's a good way to go, of just kind of getting that word out and like making each and every spot of video games a positive space.
I totally agree. And Cricket, I'll throw it to you. I know you've touched on a lot of it, but really, as we buckle down on people here, on the people who are listening or people who are watching this after the fact, what are some things or something that we can do to help push that conversation the right way?
Absolutely. Think before you type and speak. Don't make assumptions. If someone speaks a certain way, if you don't see their face, if you only see an avatar, don't make assumptions about their race or gender identity. You don't know, and you could very easily accidentally offend someone. And I'm sure we're all good people in here. We don't want to offend people. We're all playing video games. We want to have a good time. That's what we want to do here. Use inclusive language. I know this is one that a lot of people are turning their heads and going, this is new, this is funky. Preferred pronouns. If you see a setting where people are saying, hey, share with us your preferred pronouns, you could turn your nose up to it, but you're only hurting yourself. Things are changing so quickly, and I think everyone in here who's a reasonable person can agree that society evolves over time. There are so many new things that we are learning. We are learning so much more about each other in the last couple years that we've ever known. People are finally at a point where they're comfortable sharing, you know, when you say this thing, it hurts me, or it makes me feel not included, or it makes me feel called out. Pay attention to those conversations. You don't have to agree with all of them, but you should be respectful to others, and you should never invalidate their right to be there. What does it matter? Just be kind to them. As far as if you're in a game setting and you see something wrong, this is very similar to what we're seeing, I think, in a lot of bystander intervention training right now. I'm going to give you a couple things that you can do in a video game setting if you see someone being targeted or harassed. This should never, ever come at a risk of your own personal safety. Intervening in things like this can feel very, very scary, but luckily, most people aren't going to come kill you through your headset if you hear someone being targeted or harassed. The first thing is if you hear somebody being targeted or harassed in a game, what you can do to help the situation out is very calmly and frankly just say, hey, you know, that's not cool. Don't do that. Don't get into it with them. Don't argue about what they said, but just say, you know, we don't do that here. That's not cool. The second thing that you should do is check in with the person who's being targeted or harassed because they're probably upset. Um, this again, don't assume. Ask them, hey, are you okay? You know, how can I help? If they even want your help. That's the second thing. Check in with them. The third thing is, as you're trying to de escalate and make sure things aren't getting worse, if you notice that someone is really going off the handle here, or things aren't getting well, immediately report the person. Be specific. What is their handle? What did they say specifically? When did it take place? Is there a server or a lobby or something that you can tell the developer to help them track down that problematic behavior? The last thing is make sure that if someone is continuing to throw off the gameplay or harass the other user, mute the person who's being problematic, end it there. And those are four very, very simple steps that you can use to help that person who's being harassed. You can actually better the community and you can still protect yourself in the process. I hope that was okay.
Yeah, no, I mean, simplify, right? 4 quick steps. It's like the key to sales is understanding how to properly sell a story. So that's the sales side of me. I appreciate the way you summarize that. So we have a couple questions that have come through the chat that I want to identify. First one comes from Heather. So appreciate writing this in right at the beginning of all this. And Nacho, I'm going to throw this one to you first. One of the questions that she had was around first-person shooter games. And one of the myths that comes in gaming as a whole is, and I remember this growing up, kids who play shooting games, it teaches innate violent behavior in your real life. What would you say as an advocate for video games and as an advocate for gaming, that there's the benefits are of video games compared to some of the, you know, maybe false narratives that come around first-person shooter games?
Yeah, so I mean, specifically with first-person shooters, I can speak on that a little bit. Is, you know, obviously, you know, like you know, as every parent would say, you know, like, I listen, I'm not stupid. Of like, you know, these games are obviously marketed towards 18 and up, but you know, let's be real, like kids get a hold of them anyway. You know, parents don't really monitor that, or they just don't know, and they're like, yeah, you know, whatever it does to let them have some fun. I think a lot of it comes back to is like it's all these games, like for video games in general, you know, it's like a release. You know, it's like going to the movies. You know, it's like you spend those 3 or 4 hours of watching, you know, a movie. You know, it's like almost be like, oh, you know, it's a nice way to end the day. It's relaxing and it gets my mind off of certain things. I think that's kind of what it is. It's like a release and something to kind of take your mind off of like the day-to-day struggles. You know, some people, older people, you know, it's like, hey, I just do it just because, hey, I just got off work, I'm tired, I want something to do. But specifically with shooter games, I think that's just kind of a myth that's carried over to anything that talks about any violent behavior. You know, like you think of like your parents, you know, how much they hated, you know, they hate death metal, they hate, you know, the violent music, you know, of the kids today. You know, your parents say the same thing about raps, like all you do is talk about shooting people and gang related stuff. And then you go even further back, you know, you talk about violent movies in general. You know, if I go watch Die Hard, I'm not going to go out and try and hijack a bank and try and hold it ransom. Like, I think a lot of it just kind of the misconception of old versus new, of like, I'm sure them growing up, even our grandparents, like, I don't like the way that Elvis dances, it's provocative, it's like, it's the stuff like that. It's like, I don't want you listening to it because it's new and it's different. And I think a lot of the misconception comes back to that. But as far as like the violent behavior, I think specifically with kids, it can affect them a little bit, because obviously you're 13, 12 years old and you're shooting people. It's like it descends that a little bit, but I don't think it's obviously a step in, like, hey, this is a game, this isn't a reality. That's the key here. There's some people obviously you've heard of in the past who lose that grip between fantasy and reality. But I don't think it's necessarily catered towards shooters. It's just obviously on parents and loved ones to step in and say, hey, this really isn't meant for you, but if you're going to do it, this isn't real.
Right. Cricket, did you have anything to add on to that?
Yeah, absolutely. My game is technically an FPS. It's a first-person shooter. It's called Slime Rancher. Just earlier on Reddit, there's this hilarious post of a bunch of people saying, "I'm looking at the Xbox Game Pass games, and I see Doom. I see like Wolfenstein. I see whatever Rainbow Six Siege, and I see Slime Rancher here. Not all video games are violent. The other thing is, most video games are participatory. So when people are going through these narratives, there's a lot of decisions that you have to make in a game. Guess what? When you kill someone, they're going to come after you and try to kill you back. So actually, there's this weird psychological effect where, because there are consequences, it teaches people that killing people isn't good. And they are finding that there is really no evidence that video games are turning something on in young children that is making them serial killers. If anything, there is research now showing that non participatory mediums like movies, films, other things where people are just sitting back and observing, that's different. That's where people are starting to emulate killers or violence that they're seeing in that type of media, but not typically with video games. Interestingly enough, really this comes down to an ethical thing when it comes down to marketing to children. Just because something is marketed towards, it's like MTV. The real audience for MTV isn't these 24-year-old college students. It's the 14 to 16-year-olds. It's aspirational marketing. They know that younger kids want to play these scary games. They want to be cool. And some marketers lean in on that. I think, what game was it? Dead Space, that had a really famous marketing campaign, trying to say, your mom won't let you play this video game. And guess what kids want to do when they hear a marketing message like that? They want to play that video game. So the evidence just is not there. I think we need to be ethical with how we're marketing things. We need to be careful about fetishizing or romanticizing stories like military fantasies or whatever. Those type of messages, we have to be very careful the way we're crafting them and make sure that we aren't selling unhealthy fantasies to people. It's a big conversation to get started with 5 minutes. I hope that answers your question. Also, Travis, I'm going to change the battery on my headset really fast.
Yeah. All right. Well, the last question that we have is really geared more towards Alaska. So I'm going to first throw it to Nacho and take it as a whole sense, knowing that I don't believe you've ever been to Alaska. But just as a whole, when you're talking about gaming, what does gaming look like in the next 10 years, in the next 20 years? What direction are we going on? And maybe one thing that you see in the gaming world as we evolve, what does it look like in 20 years that might be different from now?
Yeah, these are some good thought-provoking questions here. I think the change is just going to be, I think it's going to obviously be a little bit more universal. I think already gaming, as like, I would say, I would make a good safe estimate that half the people on this call play games, not super consistently, but they play games. I think what it is like our parents, my parents, they grew up with the Nintendo. It's like the old Nintendo, not even the Super Nintendo, and the old Ataris. And obviously that was like a niche interest back then. It was a little bit popular, but like gaming really started showing off until like the Super Nintendo 64. That's when it became like nightly news stories of game releases, and people, you hear about the Black Friday stuff that it's like the people rushing to the stores. GTA 5 10 years ago selling for like opening weekend sold $1 billion worth of product. Like I think with us, I'd say my generation getting older, we're going to be having kids, we're going to be playing games still, and hey, and then they're going to be like, okay, well, my kid's got to play because I play. It's almost like, the old stereotype of, the dad going out and teaching his son how to play baseball. It's like, oh, like let me get you your first Louisville Slugger. It's like instead it's going to be, oh, let me go get you the new console so we can both play together. It's like that. That's kind of like that bonding experience. I think, that's not going to leave. I think it's obviously going to grow. It's going to be a bigger influence on our culture. You see it already with like celebrities, the Drake and Ninja thing from 2 years ago. You see, them playing consistent with streamers. You see them being consistent in game releases. You see, the Keanu Reeves Cyberpunk thing. It's like, I think you start seeing more and more of mainstream culture embracing gaming, and you see, you're seeing better video game movies being made, unlike the old Super Mario movie that's like should be burned. But I think it's going to be a bigger cultural influence on everything. It's going to be probably the leading force in 20 years.
Yeah, I totally agree. And this question comes from Genevieve, and Cricket, I want to throw it to you, specific to Alaska. Knowing you're an Alaskan, I want to know, or Genevieve wants to know, what do you see as the future of esports in Alaska? And I know we only have a few minutes left, but we did our last panel was around gaming in Alaska. So if you haven't checked it out, I would encourage you to see some of the questions and conversation that we had around it in that one. But Cricket, from your perspective, I know you weren't there for that. What would you say in the next 20 years, what does the future of esports in Alaska look like?
I think as the geographic barriers are going away, it is going to give so many Alaskans a viable opportunity to compete and get away from some of those expensive plane rides and the travel aspect. They're going to be able to participate on some of the biggest stages, under the like world wide tournament size scale productions, and those barriers are just going away. I'm really happy to see that a lot of people in telecom are starting to get on board with esports in Alaska, and how that's starting to drive a lot of conversations around high-speed internet. We don't just need it for streaming and Netflix anymore, but we need to be able to do that here for gaming, for simulations, for education, for I think that the gamers in Alaska are helping to drive Alaska forward technologically, and that's just going to open up so many avenues. Already, I live with game developers. I've been around game developers. All you need to make your own video game and to participate is a internet connection and a good laptop. So I really hope that we can see some little studios spawn, and that we can start to see some really big content creators and probably some of the biggest esports competitors in the world come from Barrow or Nome or Kenai. The sky's the limit.
Well, that's a great way to tie a bow on all of this. Cricket, Nacho, you guys are the best. I think this has been a fantastic conversation. I think we covered almost everything that we wanted to. So this will be recorded, and I will post it, or we'll post it on the UAF School Management channel as well. But thank you so much for your time, and thank you everyone for taking the time to jump on here. Peggy, thank you for setting this all up. School of Management, Sport and Recreation Business Program. We appreciate everybody's support, and we look forward to seeing you all in the end of April for our last session in the Spring Esports Speaker Series around coaching in esports and some of the evolutions going on in coaching. So with that, Cricket, Nacho, thank you so much. Everybody else, have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. Bother me on Twitter. I'm at Foxygen_Prime. If you have any questions, hit me up. Please come bug me.
And Hornets Venom GT, right, Nacho?
Yeah, there you go. I was like, I didn't want to, just shove it up in there, but it's like I'll be promotional. I guess.
Thank you.